to start. So welcome everybody. Thank you for coming for this interesting discussion about common warfare. This is another session of the Joint IHL Forum of ALMA and Harrison Lauder.
The Lauder School of Government, Diplomacy and Strategy.
Yeah, they have a forum, man. It's an acronym.
No, we don't have one yet.
Surprisingly.
Yeah.
This is an ongoing project. This is our 7th year of cooperation with the IDC.
I think I need more.
All of those published in 2010, 2011 we started the forum. Yeah, 7 years of cooperation with the IDC, with the law school, and now with the Harrison Lauder School. And the Lauder School of Strategy and Government and other stuff. This session is going to focus on common warfare. It's initiated by Daphne Richmond Barat's new book on the issue, but we didn't want just to do a regular session which is focused on the book and the legal. We want to have more of panels, so we have diverse panel here, which we will let them present their own in accordance with the informal nature of the forum. We're going to start a roundtable of introduction, so we will know exactly who is here and on what capacity they're taking part in the forum. I'm Amir Rosenfeld, I'm chairman of ALMA, and
I'm Tamar Sassadori. I'm a law and government student here at IDC, and I'm volunteering at ALMA, helping with administering the forum.
Hi, my name is Shikha Zaman. I'm also a third-year student in the Law and Government School. I also volunteer for ALMA.
Hey, my name is Namasfeld. I'm second-year student in the government school, and I'm here to observe.
Hi, my name is Dor. I'm fourth-year law and government student here at the IDC.
Roni Sharabani, first year. First time. First year and first time.
What may fill in now?
Thank you.
Joel Raskin, the first time I've been sitting with such new law people here, it's kind of scary. So I am a geologist in profession, and I served for over 10 years as the head of the terrain research team in the Southern Command between the years 1998 and 2008. We'll get to that later on.
My name is Jude Kfir. I'm an engineer, a civil engineer. I've been in the same organization in Pikud Haron, but I work in the buildings and also in trying to find the solution to the problems of tunneling. And then nowadays I'm researching the issue in the INSS.
I'm Daphne Richmond Barak. I teach here at IDC. I belong to the faculty, the Lauder School of Government, Diplomacy and Strategy. I'm a researcher at the Institute for Counterterrorism, and I'm interested in tunnels.
And I'm Gidam, I'm also from ALMA, I'm one of the board members. Welcome all.
okay, so how are we going to do it? We want to engage in a discussion of the matter, but we thought that to provide each speaker like 10-15 minutes to present their view on the matter, and then we go into a more thorough discussion. I think it would be best to start with Daphne, and then I think Joel and finish.
Okay, so I'll do this like again. This is a very intimate forum, as its name indicates, and I want to leave as much. For me, the most interesting part, of course, because I already know what's in the book. So for me, definitely, the most interesting part is to hear from all of you and to hear from Yuda and from Joel, who are among the only people that can actually, who actually understand this and are potentially as interested in a topic as I am, and I have not found many people like that so far. So I'm just going to kind of like lay out what are the main points in the book, the main arguments that the book is trying to make, and then when we get more into the discussion, and I can expand on whatever you found most interesting. So I think perhaps one of the most essential points that the book makes about underground warfare, which I should note means the use of tunnels in conflict. Tunnels as in a closed structure underground. Okay, so trenches, for example, where you're half above the ground. I don't talk about it in the book. So the use of these kind of structures in conflict, and one of the essential points that the book makes is that this is a very global issue, and I think that's not something that most people truly understand. If you ask people what are the states or what are the kind of situations or conflicts in which tunnels have come up, usually they probably say World War I, and Vietnam might come up as well, and then definitely Israel and the latest confrontation with Hamas in Gaza in 2014, Operation Protective Edge, will come up. And so as a result, because of that latest operation in 2014, a lot of people are under the impression that this is an Israeli problem. And true, the Israeli context prompted my thinking, my queries, my research, but one of my motivations was to show that this is not an Israeli problem. And so tunnels are actually to be found in virtually every conflict since 9/11. We find them definitely in Lebanon, we find them in Egypt, we find them in Gaza, we find them in Mali, Afghanistan, what have I forgotten? Yemen, and I'm sure I forgot more. So we really see them in a number of conflicts in some way or another. Oh, I forgot Libya. And Libya is actually kind of a little bit on its own, because in Libya what we saw was a more defensive use of tunnels, so more like going underground, in this case Gaddafi going underground to protect himself from bombardments and from being found. So that's why Libya, sometimes I forget about it because it's different, but again we see elements of underground warfare in one form or another, different variations on the theme across the globe, with a strong presence, increased presence, and almost exclusive presence at this point in the Middle East and Asia. So that's a major point that the book makes, and then the book also kind of tries to tell a story about the nature of this threat and the scope of the threat. So the scope again is very global, but what about the nature? Where does it come from? How does it diffuse? Who is interested in underground warfare? And so, of course, underground warfare is a major equalizer between parties and belligerents of different capabilities. And it's a tactic that is favored by actors who are fighting a highly sophisticated army with very strong capabilities in areas known as ISR, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance. And so this technology needs to be somehow compensated for when you don't have it. And so going underground is a wonderful way to do that, to become unattainable and findable, invisible, and the list goes on. So we see a huge appeal of the underground with these kind of actors, and they tend to be non-state actors. They tend to be relatively young non-state actors that are not too set in their ways, very flexible, kind of like willing to try new things. And they are interested in trying out this thing called tunnels and see what kind of advantage it can give them. So as a result of these trends and these patterns, what we see is that in the end of the day, the use of tunnels on the contemporary battlefield is quite innovative in nature, because these actors, again, they're trying it out, they're playing with it a little bit, they're trying to see what is going to give them in terms of advantage. Maybe we'll use it defensively, maybe we'll use it offensively, maybe you will use it to store weapons. So as actors also dig the tunnels and start using them, they discover new ways, they think of new ways to use them, and that creates a rather innovative battleground. And finally, as we try to define again the scope and the nature of the threat, we realize that there is a shift from a use of the tactic in the past that was that was mostly among combatants. So belligerents used to fight each other using tunnels. So one army was digging a tunnel in order to weaken the fortification of another. So that was kind of an anti-personnel weapon or tactic, depending on how you look at it. And so that we don't see that as much today. And another thing that has changed is that there's a shift from the use of tunnels in non-civilian populated areas to the use of tunnels in civilian populated areas. So we are moving from the mountains of Afghanistan and Mali more towards the civilian populated areas of, again, Egypt, Gaza, the suburbs of Damascus, Benghazi as well, in Libya. So, and definitely in Iraq, we have, as you know, many ISIS tunnels were found in Mosul and were found in Sinjar, and all of these are heavily populated areas. So that's definitely something that the book establishes as kind of like the background, but sets the stage for explaining what is underground warfare today. Another thing that the book does in terms of its main argument, it makes an argument that is kind of speculative about what's going to happen in the future. In the future, I argue that, and I would say that even if there is technology that is being found, unless it's absolutely grounded, which I'm sure Joel will tell us later, is virtually impossible to do because the terrain changes and the conditions change, and therefore one technology can solve all the problems, but I leave that to you. So I put that caveat, but it's a very minimal caveat. In the end of the day, what I see in the future is this tactic further spreading, being more and more attractive as the gap, the asymmetric gap itself grows. And what I see is kind of a mix between two trends. One trend, which is underground, the use of the underground, which we witness more and more. It's kind of like re-emerging, and it's becoming once again popular. So that trend, mixing it with a trend that all of us know very well, which is urban warfare. So war in general is being fought more in cities. War in general is closer to civilians, involves more civilians. And so when we take the two and we bring them together, this growing interface between the civilian world and the military realm will actually exacerbate, it will magnify the challenges for the military commanders, for states, this extension of urban warfare to the subterranean. So we'll see it in three main ways. And this is, again, one of the major points I argue in the book. We'll see it because we're likely, civilians are likely to live and to go about their business a lot where tunnels are. So the tunnels will be under their houses. So the civilians will be physically close to the tunnels. The tunnels will be built among civilians, but we can also see civilians inside tunnels. So that's the use of tunnels by civilians, which again, every step of the way you kind of like magnify the problem. So if you have civilians using these tunnels, that renders the operations to destroy these tunnels extremely problematic, virtually impossible. And finally, we're likely to see, and that's even more speculative, a greater use of tunnels against civilians, right? So if attacks, think about terrorism, usually the targets of terrorism by definition are civilian targets. So why not use a tunnel in order to go and launch an attack against civilians as opposed to against combatants? So again, three types of kind of like future use of tunnels among civilians, with three trends among civilians, by civilians, and against civilians. Finally, the last point I want to make, and this is something that the book goes, talks about at length, is that, and it's essential, is to understand that, and I think that's probably my most important objective with this book, is to share and to make it clear that when there's a tunnel in a conflict, when there are many tunnels in a conflict, it changes dramatically the operational environment in which armies operate, and this creates a strain on the armed forces. This requires the armed forces to think completely differently in terms of their equipment, in terms of potentially their rules of engagement, definitely intelligence gathering. I mean, I don't even go into that. That's a huge piece of this. But definitely also placing soldiers in harm's way, rescuing soldiers. How do you rescue a soldier from a tunnel once it's gone inside it? How do you communicate with your soldiers? How do you recruit your soldiers, because you don't want claustrophobia attacks in the tunnels, and that's a major concern for armed forces. So you need new tools, you need new technology, you need R&D, you need strategy, which is something else I insist on in the book. So the amount of peripheral, and it's not really peripheral, but of skills and know-how and expertise that needs to be acquired by militaries, and the kind of challenges that this places on the commanders who are involved in making these decisions in real time, it cannot be underestimated. So that's very important. And then the final piece is that this operational challenge, this complex operational environment translates into legal dilemmas. Because if it's impossible, because of this unknown factor, because the whole tunnel cannot be found, you don't know what's going on inside it. How will you know if there are civilians inside the tunnel? How will you know how to give advance warning to the civilians if you want to strike the tunnel? What type of weapons can be used potentially in the tunnel? Maybe some weapons will react differently if they are used in a kind of confined, closed environment of a tunnel. That's another question. So legal issues are major in terms of the operational complexity translating into these legal issues. But then there's also the kind of like more, I would say, generic legal issues, which are also really interesting. What is a tunnel? Is it a weapon? Is it a tactic? Is it a domain? And is it a military objective? Of course, is important. Is it lawful under international humanitarian law to dig a tunnel? Or perhaps if you haven't dug it, maybe international humanitarian law will look at it as okay to use the tunnel. So these are questions that are interesting under the law as well, and I'm happy to expand on any of these aspects as we go into our discussion. I think that's pretty much sums it up
Did
in a nutshell.
you find, besides this Libya example, cases where the armies used to dig tunnels, not the
Where the not you mean not non-state armed groups?
The Japanese in
The Japanese during the Second World War, yeah, that's a good idea.
very, very.
And during World War I, for sure. I mean, when the conflicts were more state to states, then you had states digging tunnels. Well, it's an interesting question what you're asking, because there's a certain stigma actually that's attaching to these tunnels. Like, you can't really think now about like the UK or the US or Australia or Canada suddenly digging tunnels in a conflict. There's a certain negative stigma attaching to the tactic, because so many non-state actors that are violent and don't abide by the laws of war have used them. So much so that it would be hard to find a law-abiding state resorting to the tactic, even though the tactic in and of itself is actually fine, legally speaking. But there is something negative about it, and that the only states that you can still see doing it are Syria, but that was in response to the rebels actually using the tunnels, but Assad's forces totally like embraced the whole effort. And then you have states that are like North Korea. Those are, I would say, the ones that are left. Not the best ones.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And now we're going to go to Dr. Joel Roskin.
Okay, good evening. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Also, the first time I'm really talking about tunnels. Really, it's on a presentation. I didn't bring my presentation. I can send you parts of it afterwards.
Joel, can you move the bucket?
The files, yeah. Took me a while to get hold of the bottle. I'm losing it. I'll start first. When I was a kid, I heard the term underground movements, and I thought they were underground. And with time, underground movements are activist movements, but today we're seeing a lot of it really underground. And I think the title here is more is a broader title and more important title. Because we're talking about underground, not just tunnels. And warfare is conducted in different ways using the underground, not just using the medium of tunnels. And I'll get to my first point. When I look at tunnels, and my case, which may have some limitations, is the case of Gaza. We have three types of tunnels, or three types of use of underground for warfare. The type that attracts the most attention today are the offensive tunnels, or cross-border tunnels, terror tunnels. Tunnels are used for attacks, usually going beneath borders or armistice lines. That's what we're afraid of the most here in Israel, it seems, at the moment. The second type is the tunnel as an axis, a smuggling tunnel. That's, in a way, how the tunnels began with Gaza Strip. It's a smuggling tunnel between Egypt and the city of Rafah beneath Israeli control on the Philadelphia line. So that's a smuggling tunnel, it's an axis which enables a build-up, a military build-up, but not a direct offensive. And the third type, it's actually the third or fourth type, is underground facilities in the depth of an entity. And here, every modern army also uses tunnels for unique munitions, for headquarters, for intelligence, and for all kinds of concealment and protection of all kinds of sensitive systems. May it be communications, may it be missiles. So underground, to summarize these three things, underground is a very active area, also with non-state and also with regular state actors. And moving on to the next point, we look back into history and archaeology. I did archaeology also. There's nothing new here, which is amazing. We're talking about, I dug a year and a half in the summer by Tel Shoket. I dug Chalcolithic, 6,000 years ago, underground infrastructures, which we can really explain what they were doing. Since then, underground has always been used.
Mhm.
So there's nothing new here,
Electricity.
in a sense.
Electricity.
What's that?
Electricity
As?
in the tunnel.
That's new.
Yes.
Okay,
It's nothing new, but it's all new.
That's
main
what so
part
started.
of it.
That's what started. So that takes me to my next point: is what is a tunnel or what is an underground facility? Here we want to talk to a tunnel, and I think Dafna mentioned a few things. If you go down to tunnels used by non-state actors, which are relatively smaller tunnels than underground facilities used by state actors, in a way a tunnel is nothing. It's a hole, it's air. Okay. And then tunnels can be reinforced, and they can maybe be concrete by wood, they can be improved, or they can be lit up by electricity, by candles. So they're a void, they're a void. They're concealed, they're dark, they're something I think beyond the imagination of most people. Okay, we somehow have a problem perceiving what the underground is, what a tunnel is. Okay, because a tunnel, being within a tunnel, we're within a different environment, a different 3D, three-dimensional environment. We live here on a 3D environment. We have a flat plane beneath us, and we have air around us. In a tunnel, you're surrounded, the three axes, by whatever is not air, by a substance. And if I go into geology, which makes it more complex, excuse me, that was difficult geology. When we go under the surface of the ground, we usually meet three different basic types of substances. One is rock. We know what a rock is. The second thing is what's defined again as soil. Soil is usually the upper meter or two, and it has a unique structure by itself. And three is what we call sediment, like sand, like gravel, which is not a solid rock, it's pieces of rock, and it's not a soil. Soil is a sediment on the surface, which has gone throughout time, different processes. So you go underneath the ground, you usually go through at least two of those three. And usually if we're talking about sediments, even a rock, a tunnel crosses through again, in the 3D dimension, also vertically, also horizontally, on the two axes, it cuts through different rocks, different sediments. And each one has a huge bundle of geophysical and geomechanical properties that makes each sediment different in its potential for being identified by all kinds of technologies. When a tunnel goes through the different sediments, and you have a series of sediments or soils or rocks above, the technology has to decipher each one along the way until it gets to the nothing, which is the air, which is even more complex than any kind of substance. Okay, because waves, okay, temperature, everything goes is transmitted very differently through a void. So that's more or less the complexity of the tunnels. Tunnel, though, is also made out of two main structures. Usually it is a more horizontal shaft or tunnel, and then the shafts that connect, also for ventilation, for entrance, for exit. So the void itself has two different orientations on different axes also. So when you look at a tunnel, what are we talking about? The entrances or the tunnel itself? And then, of course, each tunnel can have rooms and can have different segments with different properties. So I was saying a tunnel is very, very generalistic, but we have to generalize things or to have an audience listen. Here's a good audience, you know. Because they get to this point of reasoning, okay, so it's complex. Now, I'll just mention a few of my interests with regard. I don't do tunnels now full scale. It's more or less kind of a hobby. I've tried to promote it academically. Again, it hasn't gone that well. There's not much academic interest in this country concerning tunnels, and I'm talking in the fields of, let's say, mainly geography. There is some in geology, but that's very specific interest. And we're talking about all these complexities in the way we're discussing geography that relates to man and to different types of substances and to also military aspects. There's not much of interest here. I think it's one of the drawbacks also to the military that is always looking for a shelf product to solve the problem. As we learn now, there's no shelf product to identify one type or even one segment or one segment of a tunnel. And if there will be, and there may be, the question is how long it will last. Because then whatever makes the tunnel can change its parameters, either its depth, okay, or its temperature, for example, okay, or its size, its width, its length, its slope, and that'll make each successful product a need to do a lot of rethinking and reconstruction, reanalysis until it's able to catch up with these very subtle changes which have a tremendous impact on technology. There's no shelf product for identifying tunnels. Same thing also not for destroying tunnels. But beyond that, my point here is that since things are so complex, the military doesn't have time to do what we're doing now, or to initiate this long-term academic study of what a tunnel is and what are all these applications, because it really is brainstorming. And that is why one of my main questions concerning tunnels, and taking, let's say, one type of a tunnel, as I mentioned, and that's what I've asked the military several times to deal into, is what are all the parameters that a non-state tunnel actor or organization goes through and considers when it wants to construct a tunnel. I'm talking about what are the tunnel's, of course, strategic, tactical goals, okay, and how much energy does the actor have, how many resources? Is that manpower, let's go here, it's child power, talking about the military, for example, okay, how does it organize the manpower? How does it identify where's the start of the tunnel and where's the end? How does it manage the construction? How does it keep up its maintenance of the tunnel, which is way what we're thinking about. Then, okay, so how do we deal with all kinds of factors like temperature, okay, darkness, light, dampness, dust? All these factors have a strong impact depending on where the tunnel is made. Because in each type of what's called geology, different factors are more important. in each zone of conflict, even along the strip of the border with Gaza, from south to north. Okay, not only is the geology different, the geography is different, and that also has a different impact on the thought where we're going to, not only the Hamas, but also actor will start to focus its construction. So each tunnel, in a way, you can set out a large group of factors and weigh them, and give each one a certain weight, and see for each region what weights are more important, and that way, if one is trying to identify tunnel construction, so we can see in this area, these factors are more important, and they'll probably generate more intelligence, more noise in the region that can either be identified by different avenues of intelligence. That's a big question, which I think has not been addressed. It's a lot of work. It demands, again, a multidisciplinary team. And again, we're talking on the military side. It needs also people, of course, with a military background, and of course, military clearance, yeah, at different levels also. Okay. A few more things. I read Daphne's book. I think it's really a great book, and I really agree with also the outlook for the future, which makes it even more important. I'd like to stress the humanitarian issue, because that's why we came here, and not men of the law here. But if you look where we have the tunnels developed, at least in the Israel, it's mainly Lebanon and the Gaza Strip. In both areas, we can see or suggest that the background was the unilateral retreat of the Israeli forces, which left a border with no buffer zone. In the past, when there were larger military conflicts, Israel created a buffer zone between the enemy and the country, and this buffer zone had to be managed in a very complex way. It cost a lot of losses for soldiers in Lebanon, it cost a lot of money. But the buffer zone limited the amount of underground activity. Because if we're talking about the offensive cross-border tunnels, we're talking about a limited length, several kilometers, which needs to address also the entrance, which is concealed, and the exit, which is the target of attack or offensive movement, and they have to be very close to each other. So if we widen a gap between the start and end of such type of tunnels, it will help, for example, limit the impact and the threat of that type of tunnel. On the other hand, the tunnels which are in the depth, which are used for concealment, headquarters, and I mentioned before, for ballistic offensives, which is, I think, even the largest threat Israel has today, also from the Gaza Strip. That demands a lot more expertise than even the offensive tunnels. So I think because they're concealed within urban areas, they're not accessed from the border. There's no physical contact by the state actor, let's call it. Okay, the awareness and also the knowledge about them is way less. And here, there may be some additional surprises beyond that which that you mentioned. Shouldn't that be enough for now? Thank you.
Thank you.
No.
So, we move to you.
כן. אני רוצה קצת לתת לכם קצת המחשות. אפשר לחבות אותו? זה לוקח את זה. אני, ברשותכם, אני אדבר בעברית, כי קצת קשה לי עם האנגלית, לפחות עם הרקע האקדמי. בכל מקרה, קודם כל אני מאוד שמח להגיע הנה ולדבר. אני בעצם נחשפתי לנושא המנהרות כבר ב-2005, מיד אחרי מקרה של שליט, והמנהרות הברחה. הייתי שותף לכמה פרויקטים של ניסיונות מוקדמים לעצור את המנהרות. התחלתי באמת לחקור, והבנתי שהתופעה הזאת היא באמת תופעה מאוד רחבה, תופעה מאוד גדולה, מאוד גלובלית, כמו שציינת. ומעבר לזה, יש דברים נוספים שקשורים בכלל להבנה שלנו מה זה. הרעיון, אני חושב, ה-underground warfare הוא רעיון נכון, ועלתה כאן השאלה מה זו מנהרה בעצם, איך אנחנו מתייחסים בכלל למנהרה. לפחות בכמה מאמרים שאני קראתי, ההתייחסות וגם ההתייחסות היום של הצבא, זה נושא של תווך תת-קרקעי. דרך אגב, הנושא הזה של תווך תת-קרקעי, אם יש משהו שכן הצלחתי בצבא, כי אני שנים ניסיתי להכניס את הנושא הזה ולא הצלחתי, אז את המונח תווך תת-קרקעי, זה כן הצבא אימץ ולקח, וברגע שאנחנו מתייחסים על זה כתווך תת-קרקעי, אז בעצם אנחנו פה מדברים על משהו שדומה לשימוש הראשון שנעשה בצוללות. וגם את מזכירה את זה בספר באמת, והשימוש הזה בעצם עם הצוללת, אם אנחנו מסתכלים בהיסטוריה של ההיסטוריה מבחינת התפתחות הקרב הימי, הצוללת לא הייתה ידועה מאות שנים, האפשרות, אבל בעצם רק במלחמת העולם הראשונה הבינו שהצוללת משנה את שדה הקרב הימי, וגם אז, דרך אגב, צצו הרבה מאוד שאלות חוקיות. מה עושים? האם מזהירים לפני שתוקפים את האונייה, הניצולים, אוספים אותם, לא אוספים אותם? היו המון שאלות בנושאים האלה שצצו תוך כדי. וגם, דרך אגב, במלחמת העולם הראשונה, לאו דווקא מי שהיה לו את הצוללות הכי מתוחכמות, או את יותר הצוללות, הוא זה שהשיג את ההצלחות הגדולות. דווקא הגרמנים, שהיה להם פחות צוללות, הצליחו להבין את המשמעות של איך לנצל את הצוללת בצורה המיטבית, ולהביא לתוצאות שבעצם שינו את שדה הקרב הימי. ופה אני הבאתי אמירה שלפי דעתי, אמירה שממחישה את הנושא מצוין. יעקב עמידרור היה יועץ הרמטכ"ל לענייני המנהרות לפני צוק איתן, והוא בכנות מאוד מפתיעה, כששאלו אותו למה בעצם, איך כאילו בצוק איתן הופתענו, אז הוא אמר, ידענו על סכנת המנהרות, לא הבנו את המשמעות האמיתית. יש פער אנושי בין הבנה תיאורטית להבנה מעשית. אז זה באמת קצת, באמת התנסות שמתאימה לעורכי דין, אבל הרעיון הוא שאין עדיין הבנה מה המשמעות של השימוש בתווך התת-קרקעי, ואיך הוא הולך להשפיע על שדה הקרב, ושדה הקרב המודרני, כי אנחנו מדברים על עוד כל מיני שינויים שיש, אני אציג אותם אחר כך. הייתי רוצה לתת לכם עכשיו איזה קטע באנגלית, שמספר על מלחמת העולם הראשונה דווקא. That would see its first act unfold when General Sir Herbert Plumer detonated his 19 mine tunnels packed with explosives under German positions at Messines Ridge. That detonation came this week. It came after a week-long artillery barrage with the heaviest concentration of artillery seen on any front so far, so the heaviest in history. Plumer had one big gun for every 7 meters of front. 3:10 a.m. on June 7, 1917, the mines were detonated almost simultaneously. The entire ridge went straight up into the air. You could feel tremors from the blast in London, and apparently British Prime Minister David Lloyd George heard a faint boom while working through the night at 10 Downing Street. The concussion at the scene was tremendous, and one soldier recounted, "The whole earth seemed to rock and sway, several of the men and myself being thrown down violently. It seemed to be several minutes before the earth stood still again. Flames rose to a great height. Silhouetted against the flames, I saw huge blocks of earth that seemed to be as big as houses falling back to the ground. It was awful, a sort of inferno." A man from a tank crew said, "You've never seen anything like the size of it. You'd never believed that explosives could do it. I saw about 150 Germans lying dead there. The mine had killed them all. The mine had won the battle before it started." 10,000 German soldiers are believed to have been killed or buried alive right off the bat. Thousands more were totally stunned, and 7,354 prisoners were taken. The British infantry took possession of a chain of craters over 20 meters deep, where much of Messines Ridge had been. This was a spectacular success, achieving its objective with virtually no cost in men.
but it was actually only a limited success. The British had penetrated the German positions. What Plumer had done there was one of the most successful attacks of the war, make no mistake. The planning was both colossal and meticulous, and the execution near flawless. But imagine being a soldier there that day. The gigantic boom assaulting your ears, seeing an area the size of a village blast into the air, seeing a huge column of flame ignite the sky, seeing thousands of the men die in an instant. Just try to imagine being there that day. You've been fighting in the trenches in muddy, miserable Flanders for years, unquestionably living in hell, and then today, hell got even worse.
טוב, תיאור מאוד מאוד מוחשי של הנושא. הזכרתם את הנושא הזה של ערים ומלחמה בעיר עם נושא של מנהרות. אני דווקא כן חושב שהייתה כזו דוגמה, וזה בוורשה, במלחמת העולם השנייה. פה אפשר לראות את האנדרטה הראשונה שהניצולים של המרד בנו. אפשר לראות שזה בצורה של, זה בתמונה שהם בעצם מיד אחרי המלחמה, הם עשו את זה בצורה של נושא ביוב. כי הנושא הזה של שימוש במנהרות הביוב בוורשה שהיו עוד לפני המלחמה, בעצם היה מאוד משמעותי מבחינת הניצולים עצמם אפילו. אחר כך כמובן נשכח, או פחות, היום כשמסתובבים שם פחות מדגישים את הנושא הזה. אבל מה שחשוב, זה דרך אגב האנדרטה של המרד, לא מרד ורשה היהודי, אלא המרד של הפולנים עצמם. חשוב להבין שבאחד הדברים המשמעותיים פה שאפשר להבין מהם, זה ההרס העצום, והזכרתם את הפגיעה באזרחים, ההרס העצום שצבא קונבנציונלי נכנס לתוך מערך של מנהרות בתוך עיר. זו העיר ורשה, ככה היא נראתה אחרי תום הקרבות במלחמת העולם השנייה, לא הרובע היהודי, אלא ורשה הרגילה. לעומת זה, הרובע היהודי נראה בצורה כזאת, זאת אומרת, שימו לב להבדלים מבחינת ההרס. הרובע היהודי, בגלל שהמלחמה הייתה עיקשת, ובגלל שהלוחמים נלחמו מתוך הביוב בסופו של דבר, הצבא הגרמני נאלץ, כן, לעבור בעצם בונקר ולחסל את ההתנגדות. דרך אגב, למרות כל הניסיונות הוא לא הצליח לחסל את כל ההתנגדות, זה רק מראה את הקושי גם במלחמה של צבא הוא רגיל בתוך עיר, ובסופו של דבר ההרס הוא כל כך נרחב, שבעצם האזור היחידי בוורשה שלא שוקם אחרי המלחמה, ולא שוחזר, סליחה, הכל שוקם אבל לא שוחזר, זה הרובע היהודי בדיוק מהסיבה הזאת. ולכן כשאנחנו למשל חושבים על הצבא שלנו נכנס לעזה ומתמודד עם הנושא של המנהרות, זה אומר שבצדק הגנרלים יגידו, אנחנו מגיעים לתוצאה הזאת. זאת אומרת, יש לנו מנהרות, אנחנו חייבים להתגבר עליהן, וכמובן שההרס הזה בסופו של דבר, אנחנו רואים מה שקורה היום ברצועה, ההרס הזה משחק לידי החמאס, ובעצם הופך לבלתי אפשרי. מעבר לזה, יש גם את נושא הנפגעים הרבים שקרב מסוג כזה עושה, זה דוגמה של איבו-ג'ימה, קרב שבו האמריקאים ספגו אבדות כבדות מאוד, ובעצם, יש לי פה עוד תיאורים, בעצם בסופו של דבר, הלוחמה התת-קרקעית ביפן היא זו שאילצה את ארצות הברית להגיע לשימוש בפצצת אטום, ולכן אנחנו מבינים מתוך זה את הסכנה שיש בנושא הזה, שזה מביא את שני הצדדים בעצם לסף מאוד, נקרא לזה טוטלי ומשמעותי מבחינת הלוחמה. פה יש קטע מסרט שנעשה של קלינט איסטווד על הקרב באיוו ג'ימה, שמתאר בצורה יפה מאוד את התחלת הקרב. שם פשוט אני בכמה מילים אסביר, באיוו ג'ימה היפנים התחפרו בתוך מתחם תת-קרקעי, הם היו בנחיתות מוחלטת מבחינה אווירית, הם היו בעצם תחת מצור, בלי יכולת אספקה משום גורם מוצד. אפשר להגיד שהם, כמו שאנחנו לצורך העניין היום טוענים, שאנחנו מסוגלים להגיע למקומות רחוקים, לראות הכל, לשמוע הכל, אז האמריקאים באותה תקופה יכלו לראות הכל ולשמוע הכל. הם חשבו, האמריקאים, שהם תוך כמה ימים מחסלים שם את הכוח, אבל הם נלחמו שם במשך למעלה מחודש, עם הרבה מאוד נפגעים. מה שבקטע הזה אפשר לראות זה כמה נוח למגן להשתמש במנהרות, מול כוח שתוקף אותו, וגם השימוש, וזה לצערי לא מוזכר פה, השימוש שנעשה כעמדות ארטילריה, אנחנו ראינו את זה גם בעזה, גם בלבנון, משהו שהוא מאוד מאוד מקשה על הכוחות התוקפים. זאת אומרת, היום רקטה שמורית ממרחק מאות קילומטרים, היא קבורה באדמה ויורים אותה מתוך עמדות מוסבות מתוך האדמה, קשה מאוד להילחם ולפגוע.
אתה זוכר את השם של הסרט?
כן, ודאי. Letters from Iwo Jima.
There's another movie about it though that just came out recently.
פה אפשר לראות איך היפנים בעצם נותנים לאמריקאים לעלות על החוף, בעצם להגיע מה שנקרא שטחי השמדה, ואז הם תוקפים אותם מתוך העמדות המוסבות ובעצם המוגנות שלהם. זה עמדת הפיקוד של הגנרל, יכולים לראות את העמדות המוגנות שהיו ברחבי האזור.
האמת שאני מאוד להגיד, יש גם סדרה שעשו ב-HBO, ראית אותה?
ראיתי.
אני לא זוכר איך קוראים לה, אבל אני זוכר שהיה שם.
פסיפיק משהו.
כן.
לוחמי פסיפיק. אפשר לראות אותה, יורדים את התותח מתוך עמדה, הוא מוגן כמעט ב-100%. כמו שראיתם שם, שימון זה אחד הנשקים שהאמריקאים פיתחו כנגד המנהרות.
זה הפליימת'רור.
ואני להערכתי, גם אנחנו נראה את זה גם במלחמות בעתיד. דיברתם על הנושא של הנשק, צריך לזכור שיש גם עניין פסיכולוגי מאוד משמעותי במלחמה התת-קרקעית, במיוחד לאזרחים, אבל גם ללוחמים עצמם, יוצר קושי מאוד גדול. היום אני שומע את זה גם דרך אגב מהאמריקאים, שהם מתאמנים על המתארים האלה, וזה באמת שאלה טובה איך חיילים יכולים להתמודד עם הנושא הזה, וכמובן איך אזרחים. להערכתי, עד כמה שאני חקרתי את הדברים, לא סתם אנחנו בעצם, אין לך הרבה מקורות על הלוחמה התת-קרקעית, פשוט יש ניסיון להערכתי, לפחות ב100 שנה האחרונה, לא להשכיח את זה, לא לדבר על זה, זה יוצר קשיים מאוד גדולים. אני למשל, כשדיברתי עם אזרחים על הסוגיה הזאת, אז אמרו לי, מה, אתה רוצה שנקבור את עצמנו בחיים? זאת אומרת, הנושא הזה כמו של המוות, להיכנס מתחת למשמעות עם הבחינה הזאת. יש עדות שאני מצאתי של לוחם בווייטנאם, אני אמצוא את זה, שנייה רגע. לא, פה אפשר לראות את המנהרות בווייטנאם, באמת על המידת תחכום שלהם, וכמה הם באמת, עד כמה האמריקאים בכלל לא ידעו והבינו את המשמעויות של זה. כאן יש עדות מאוד מעניינת של לוחם שנלחם במנהרות, בראשי המנהרות. הוא מתאר את הקרב התת-קרקעי וההשפעה שיש לו עליו, שבעצם השפיע עליו.
There's almost in-time warfare. Don't turn on the light unless you're really sure you're alone. Use your senses. Do your first killing as quietly as you can. That means don't shoot. I chased somebody into a home. I thought I was alone, and then I smelled their breath. And we had a wrestling match in the dark, and I got the upper hand and crushed this person's trachea, held it down while he died. And then got out. I beat and strangled someone to death in a tunnel, in the dark. But that wasn't the only casualty. The other casualty was the civilized version of me.
אז כמו שאתם רואים, ההשפעה הזאת היא מאוד משמעותית על חיילים. לא ברור איך חיילים שהתקלו בתופעות האלה, איך בעצם התנהגו ומה תהיה התגובה שלהם, ואיך הם יוכלו לעמוד מורלית בעניין הזה, וגם בנושא הזה, לצורך העניין, צריך ללמד את החיילים איך להתמודד עם הדברים האלה. זה לא בדיוק קדימה הסתער, כולנו ביחד, יוצאים למלחמה בכיף ביחד, יש לנו המון אפקט של להתמודד לבד בעצם מול האויב. דיברנו על הנושא של העתיד, יש פה המון דברים חדשים של איך להשתמש במנהרות. האמת היא שמי שעושה את זה, אני חושב מי שהיום מפתח את הנושא הזה, כמו שהזכרנו, זה צפון קוריאה. יש כאן איזה סרטון קצר שמסביר מה בדיוק, איך בדיוק הצפון קוריאנים משתמשים בנושא המנהרות.
So as Kim Il-sung set about rebuilding and rearming what would become North Korea, all of this was on his mind. He began to dig under the mountains, and North Korea became one of the most heavily fortified countries in the world. There's an estimated 8,000 to 15,000 underground facilities. Factories are underground. There's underground Air Force hangars and runways that cut through mountains. Naval bases with underground ports. artillery pieces shielding caves. The world's 5th largest army, hidden and protected by mountains. Now, Kim Jong-un is hidden too, often traveling through long mountain tunnels to evade spy satellites and other would-be threats. So any attack on North Korea isn't just about penetrating rock face. It's about knowing where the targets are in the first place. 60 miles.
פה אפשר לראות את בעצם מה שצפון קוריאה עושה, היא מביאה את הנושא הזה של המנהרות לעידן המודרני, ומעבר למה שראיתם מבחינת המודרני, אם שמתם לב שם אפילו שדה תעופה שהוא תת-קרקעי, או מסלול טיסה שהוא תת-קרקעי, זה דברים שלא מוכרים לנו בכלל מבחינת הטכנולוגיה שלהם. יש להם בשוויץ. בשוויץ יש, שומרים את המטוסים, אבל לא עושים מסלול תעופה. אני חושב שהמטוס נכנס מהאוויר, טס, ובמסלול עצמו נכנס מתחת לאדמה, ואחר כך יכול לצאת מהצד השני. זאת אומרת, זה משהו מבחינת רמת מיגון מאוד משוכלל. יש משערים שיש, אני לא זוכר כרגע את הנתונים, אבל כל חץ כזה, שיש כאן יש את הסרטוט של האזור המפורז בין צפון קוריאה לדרום קוריאה, כל חץ כזה לצורך העניין זו מנהרה שחושדים שקיימת, לא יודעים, זאת אומרת, משערים שיש, לא מצאו אותה, המנהרות, מה שמסומן פה בחץ, זה אותן מנהרות שכן מצאו. המנהרות האלה הן מנהרות מאוד ארוכות, מאוד עמוקות, והן גם, אפשר לראות פה בקילומטר 200, הן גם יכולות לאפשר בעצם לצבא גדול או צבא לעבור ולהיכנס. זאת אומרת, אנחנו לא מדברים על מנהרות בסדר גודל כמו שראינו בעזה או מקומות כאלה, ולכן עוד פעם, פה המנהרה היא לצורך העניין משהו שונה לגמרי לעומת מה שראינו במקומות אחרים, ובכל זאת זה עדיין נקרא מנהרה וזה עדיין נקרא מלחמה תת-קרקעית. אני אסיים פה בנושא הזה של בעצם מה הולך להיות בעתיד. אז קודם כל יש התעוררות בינלאומית סביב העניין הזה, כאן אפשר לראות יש מה שראינו קודם זה דארפה שמפתחים כרגע את הנושא הזה ונכנסים למחקר סביב הנושא התת-קרקעי, זאת אומרת אתם מבינו שהנושא הזה הוא משמעותי. מבחינת שדה הקרב המודרני צריך לזכור שאנחנו מדברים על שדה קרב שהמצלמה בו היא מאוד חשובה. פה אפשר לראות למשל לא איך אנחנו עצרנו בעזה את החמאס, אלא איך לצורך העניין בבולגריה עצרו את הפליטים. אז אפשר לראות כמה המצלמות הן משמעותיות, יש פה קבוצה של צלמים ופה קבוצה של צלמים, ומצלמים את הפליט המסכן הזה, וכל היתר עומדים פה בשורות ומחכים, פשוט לא עושים כלום בגלל המצלמות. וזה משהו מאוד משמעותי, הכוח של המצלמה, ובעצם תחשבו שמבחינת מנהרות לא רואים את זה, זה לא מופיע פה, יכולה להיות פה מנהרה למטה, אף אחד לא יודע, אף אחד לא מכיר, וזה כוח עוצמה אדירה שיש לנושא התת-קרקעי לעומת כל דבר אחר. ויש לי פה לסיום קטע פה כתבתי עוד כמה דברים שקשורים לשדה הקרב המודרני, אבל אני חושב שזה פחות רלוונטי כרגע. ומשהו שאני מאוד מאמין בו, פיתוח יכולות הגנתיות בלבד, דומה לחיל אוויר שמתמקד במומן בלבד, מבלי להשתמש במטוסים. לא יכול להיות שאנחנו כצבא או צבאות אחרים לא יתחילו להיכנס לממד התווך התת-קרקעי ולפתח יכולות, אם זה טורפדו תת-קרקעי, אם זה צוללת תת-קרקעית, הדברים האלה אומנם נראים דיונים, אבל הם בהחלט אפשריים. מה יהיה לנו בעתיד, כן? מנהרות ארוכות יותר, אנחנו מדברים על מנהרות של עשרות קילומטר, עמוקות יותר, רחבות יותר, שאפשר להעביר בהן הרבה כוחות. פיתוח יכולות חפירה רובוטיות, כבר היום זה קיים, וזה יהיה יותר ויותר, כולל פיתוח יכולות חפירה תת-ימית, שהיו מפתחים את זה בעיקר לצורכי קריאה. טוב, זה דיברנו.
זה מרגיש יותר.
יש פה קטע של סרט ממטריקס, שמתאר את השימוש במנהרות והמדע הבדיוני. זהו, אז בנימה אופטימית זו.
Okay. Wow. Thank you for the very interesting presentation. And now we are going to open the floor for questions. And I will take the liberty of actually asking the first question to Joe. Usually when we deal with minefields, we take into account that the land moves. Now you have different types of tunnels. You have tunnels like in Vietnam that are completely soil and ground and rocks, and you have more modern tunnels which are more cement and more wood and everything structured. What are the chances that when you build a tunnel, which is not that sophisticated, it will shift and the words will actually change, and when you go in, you don't know where you're going to get out?
I understood the question. I don't know if I understood the question, but I'll answer several answers here. First of all, I think we understood that the smaller the tunnel is, the more difficult it is to detect. That's pretty clear and obvious. So we're talking about a tremendous difference between two opponents. One opponent is using the most primitive method. It demands the most sophisticated methodologies, technologies, intelligence to identify and to find ways to cope with the tunnel. That's one thing. You asked about the construction of the tunnel, I think, also. What's your question about construction? Is it navigation, or it's changing the properties of the soil around?
The thing is, usually, if I want to operate against a tunnel, usually I need to know not only where it begins, but where its purpose. The purpose is usually where it ends.
Correct.
Well, unless it's being just for hiding at the moment. But if it's let's say low-tack tunnel, the 2 points of beginning and ending might shift and change, if I understand correctly, because land moves.
Oh, no, okay. So there's two basic questions in geology about tunnels. One of it, let's begin with the water table. People for years asked, is it above the water table or beneath the water table? As though the water table will probably be very problematic for making tunnels. Well, in Mexico, they make tunnels within the water table, within the water. So water is not restriction. As I mentioned before, for every type of tunnel, every environment, there's different balances that need to be made. It's all a question of the amount of resources, energy, and motivation that you have. Regarding Earth movement, the Earth is, one advantage here, it's usually pretty static. It does not move that much. So we don't expect to be influenced by the Earth as it is, other than local falls of rock where there's inherent instability within the properties of the rock. But there are certain opportunities to see the tunnel change. If there's an earthquake, or if you infiltrate water from above, or raise the water table, which is a very, this is the first time I thought about this right now, by the way. There's ways to, for example, south of Tel Aviv here, we're raising the water table by infiltrating water. Move the water table up. It's a possibility that we also conceal the way to take care of certain tunnels. This came up right now. It exemplifies the complexity. Okay. Because the military way back did a relatively in-depth investigation by seeing how we can see how water infiltrates and changes the property of the different units of the sediment and rock, and possibly lead to destruction of the tunnel. But on the same line, maybe if you have wetter and softer sediments, it can make tunneling actually easier. The digging easier, but the stabilization more difficult. So again, it just shows the different complexities.
Is there some sort of equivalent to, like you said, Ido asked about, like there's drifting off after like heavy rains, or soil moves?
Well, I'm going to get to that right now. Okay, so the third topic is what happens upon the surface, in relation with the surface and the tunnels. I think you knows in Rafa, for example, there was tremendous amounts of earthworks being done there. That changed, let's say a meter or two of the upper part of what I call the subsurface. And that had a dramatic impact on the drainage, which is also a very important factor related to the surface. The drainage of the water. Does the water make puddles, pools? Does it flow off? Does it infiltrate? It's a big question of surface hydrology and also subsurface hydrology. Each one is a different academic discipline. So in Rafa, for example, there were cases where water did infiltrate at certain specific locations. By chance, if there was a tunnel beneath, that certain and short segment of the tunnel may have been damaged or destroyed. Okay, so if 1/10 is destroyed, a few days, I don't know how many, because it's never studied, a few days of construction by either kids or adults can bypass that area. On the other hand, we also saw, unfortunately, in Rafah, that when there were engineering attempts to go down to the tunnels after a rainfall event, the pit which accessed the tunnel collapsed and caused casualties on the Israeli side. So there's pros and cons, okay, all these things. Another example, I don't know, it was never verified, there are about 3 experts in field soil science in Israel. It's a subdiscipline of earth sciences, soil science. And he told me a couple of months before Tzuk Eitan, the edge, he was walking near the border with Gaza, and he saw very strange depressions on the surface of the earth that he never saw before in his life. It does not fit any academic or geographic logic or principle. And he asked me to get the phone number of a person, of a geologist in the army, because this man was one of my scientists in reserve duty. This was after I was in the army, but it didn't go through. And that may have possibly been the upper parts of a shaft that were either exposed and then recovered, or that since the shaft reached close to the subsurface, there was some very local, shrinkage of the soil there because of the change of the properties of the soil. The more exposed to air from both sides, so it became drier, more compact, and then there's probably some shrinkage, and that caused these local depressions. So again, we're talking something very small. So I think I gave you kind of broad answer. Again, to define the complexity of the things and how for each field you need a specific expert.
מה שכן, חשוב להדגיש שמהנדסים מעדיפים שהקרקע תהיה כמה שיותר חזקה, כלומר שהסלע יהיה כמה שיותר חזק, ואז זה מאפשר, אומנם יותר קשה לחפור, אבל מצד שני היציבות היא הרבה יותר גדולה. ולכן, למרות שבאזור עזה לצורך העניין, באמת קל לחפור ומבצעים חפירות, לעומת זה, אם למשל מבצעים חפירות באזור הצפון, היכולת גם לאתר וגם לזהות וגם לפגוע היא הרבה יותר מוגבלת וקטנה. ולכן סוג הקרקע הוא מאוד מאוד משמעותי בהיבט הזה.
I'll take on for that. Allow me. I have a very important slide in the presentation where I show that a byproduct of one investigation of the soil properties of different layers was that there was a geophysical investigation which propagated waves throughout the soil and showed how with the depth, the speed of the waves changed. The faster the waves move is a proportion to the density of the soil. And you do not get like a linear change with depth. You get 3 patches. The first 4 meters was relatively loose, slow waves. Then you have from 4 to 12 meters, and then 12 on to 20, that was the depth was examined, you get more compact soil. So along with your line, okay, as an engineer, I prefer to go beyond 12 meters because it's the most compact and most sturdy soil. On the other hand, if we look at a poor or an active, not too active, he has a limited amount of resource. So that would be going down too deep, and it's more difficult to work there, and also probably less oxygen, being also more damp conditions. So it was mentioned that at that time, from the limited data I had, about 80% of the tunnels in Gaza were between the 4 and 12 meters, an intermediate level, where there was a balance between loose and very hard. And that was the ideal depth with which they chose.
What I think is remarkable though is that, and we're having this discussion, I think it becomes so apparent that it's such an interdisciplinary exercise, right? You can't just talk to the military person who understands the tactic from the military standpoint. You need to talk to a geologist who's going to tell you this, because the thing is, this knowledge allows you to, in the end of the day, what you just described allows you to think about what kind of tunnel you're looking for, because you need to be able, in order to look for something, you need to know what you're looking for. And so what you're saying is, if you've identified that depending on the resources of that actor and their capability, the likelihood is that they're going to dig between 4 and 12 meters, because below 4, the conditions are not optimal, and under 12, it's going to be too time-consuming and cost-consuming. Then, I mean, you already know you've narrowed down your range of possibilities, but you can't do that if you don't have around the table the military guy with the strategist, or with, so it totally shows that you need this breadth of knowledge. I think it's mind-blowing when we hear.
Technology is very,
technology, of course, but
important here, because if there is a new technologies that don't know, שלא יודעים עליה, היא משנה לגמרי את התמונה הזאת של ה...
Any questions? Maybe I have one main question, but before that, maybe I can share with you guys my insight as a soldier that recently got released. Just as well, I was in the Gaza Strip for half a year before it's not only the protected edge operation, but also before that. So for me, I find it like very hard to believe that the higher branch did not, wasn't aware enough about this threat. I mean, the aggressive tunnels mostly, because I was not a commander or an officer. I was the most basic fighter, and they made us all remember the name of the tunnels that they knew about already. So
And that was 6 months before protected, like end
yeah,
of
that was
October
6 months,
2013.
maybe 2013,
Yeah.
around that time.
That would be the show.
Like
And
it was just in the time when there was like a heavy rain, and one of the first tunnels got revealed because of the rain. Yeah, I remember the general showed us around to this tunnel. It was very impressive, very like 20 meters deep. They showed us as well. I still remember it because it was very surprising psychologically to see it underneath our noses. The Coca-Cola cans from
Inside
like
the-
1.5 months before that. So people was there digging. It was just under one of the hills for the vehicles. So
Yeah, but they knew
Yeah.
about the tunnels, but they didn't know what to do about it. I think that
Yeah.
that's what's really
They didn't know what's the meaning,
Mm.
what is going to affect,
What-
how it's going to affect
Yeah.
the war. And I think that what happened in Tukaitan is that the government want to seek for a target that is not to go into Gaza, but to find something that they can show that something that we done. So they took the tunnels as a target because they thought that it would be simple to handle. Of course, it wasn't so easy למחוק בעצם את המנהרות.
And also, I still don't understand what was the reason to put people going inside the tunnels. Is there really no?
soldiers in it.
Yeah, is there really no other solution to identify? Like I thought, basic thoughts, nothing academic or anything, yeah, but fires or water or gas, something to robots, cameras, anything to reveal
This is what you need to think about it for 5 minutes or a bit more, and then you'll come up with some solutions. But if you haven't thought about it, if you're just kind of like dealing with the threat as it comes along, and you don't have a strategy, and you haven't developed the methods, and you haven't invested any resources in this, then you're going to do this, what seems the most obvious, which is to send someone inside. I think there was an awareness about the risks that you expose a soldier to when you get inside a tunnel. But I think in terms of strategy, if you think about it and you build a strategy, sending a soldier inside a tunnel should be your last resort, not your first resort. And I think we all agree on that.
But it's a very good question because nowadays it's something that the military is a lot concerned about.
Yeah.
And I don't think that there is one answer because it's very difficult to assess what's going to be in the battlefield and what should we do against the Taliban. And the legal thing here is very important because one of the main weapons against tunnels is to use gas, but it's not legal.
Not legal.
It's not. I think that it's not legal, and so it's. I know that they discussed it, but are we going to use the gas? The German did it in Russia example. So it's very hard to decide are we going to use it, but the robots is the thing that we should think about as the weapon that can fight in the tunnels.
And by the way, connecting to your point, one of your points that those small bumps on the ground, like I'm not sure if it's connected, but I remember that the general also said that to make the tunnel to know where to dig to,
Yeah.
They would build like very small holes.
Right.
And then put something and somebody look and then he will tell him what in which angle to dig. So he will not.
But again, it's part of this learning curve, right? Once you've done it once and you have experience, then your second tunnel will get easier and the third tunnel will get easier. And in the end, you grow kind of, you create these experts that are really, they become, even if they don't have a background in engineering, they become your on the ground, or in this case, above ground engineer, who's going to be able to dig the other tunnels and figure out exactly, in order to go from point A to point B, how steep does the tunnel have to be? What is the angle, and over what what distance, and what geological obstacles you're likely to find along the way. But the point is that this is knowledge that you quickly acquire. Just as steep as the tunnel, the learning curve is also pretty steep. And as you do it, it becomes very advantageous to try to do it again because you've already gone through the hardest part. So why not do it again? Like the kind of the sunk cost is.
And also, I can say in my experience, the psychological factor is very noticeable.
Mm-hmm.
I remember before the operation, just knowing I was like in a on the border and very tense. You're very tense all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You don't sleep as well, of course. Nobody sleeps, but it's even more noticeable.
You're saying the psychological impact. It's interesting what you're saying. I just want to kind of like sharpen this a little bit. It's the psychological impact on a soldier who's not even inside the tunnel in this case.
Not inside the tunnel.
Exactly, but that's very important because there's a whole range of psychological effects. There's for the person going in the tunnel, and then there's the psychological impact on the civilian population, who, when they are in their kitchens, are also worried that somebody's going to somehow pop out of the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So even though the risk may be relatively minor, the fear is huge. And what you're describing is the soldier in an area that is prone to tunnels, how the soldier feels, and the way this has been talked about in military theory is as a spherical kind of battlefield. So you're in a battlefield where it's not that when you advance, you kind of like secure your rear, right? You advance not knowing that a threat can actually come from behind you, which is not the case in traditional warfare. And when you're guarding, it's spherical. It can come from any point around you. And
that's why we were.
And it's a challenge, and you need to get training for how to deal with that. So
that's why we were in a circular formation.
Mm-hmm.
We were inside the tornado. I don't know how to say it. Like and then we split and guarding the entrance to the tornadoes because of this.
Because it can come from anywhere. It's a circle.
Mm-hmm. To protect us, not
exactly
to protect
for you to protect yourself. I totally understand.
Okay, let's move to the next question.
I have two very separate and different questions. One of which is more toward you, Daphne, out of the research that you did, if you found that there was any other improvement in warfare throughout history that made such a dramatic difference on so many levels, like you're saying, the civilians and the military, and everything around that kind of had everyone rethink about strategies in general, if there was something that you can compare it to, just out of curiosity. And the second question is really, do you see the tunnels being built more for for a long-term or short-term basis, especially in the Gaza conflict, just as an example, knowing that maybe the second that they were really noticed and used the tunnels, that maybe it's worth only using certain resources in order to make more tunnels, but that are either more detectable or that maybe even be destructible in an easier way, shape, or form, but as long as you have more. So just when you were speaking about the different parameters sorry for my voice, the different parameters when they were when trying to build this entire system of tunnels, if the length, the time length of the tunnel is something that's taken into consideration.
I'll start. Anything comparable that changes the operational environment to such a great extent. So I want to actually just add one little dimension that we haven't spoken about here that is also, I think, something that's very unique to subterranean combat. And when we're dealing with cross-border threats, and they're not all cross-border, the tunnels, but cross-border tunnels have something very unique to them, which is that they threaten not only the enemy, but they actually put the population of the side that's digging the tunnel into danger. Usually when you fight a war, your objective obviously is to weaken your enemy, so you put the enemy in danger, and very rarely does this actually affect your own population. So you might even build a nuclear weapon. This is not a huge threat to your own people. You want to, I don't know, you have tanks at the border, you're using air power. This is a threat to the other side. What's interesting in the digging of cross-border tunnels is that the party that digs the tunnel exposes intentionally, because there's no other way to think about it, if there are civilians around, its own civilians to the same threat. This is interesting because Palestinians that live in Gaza, they were interviewed about this, and they totally view this as threatening them. They view these cross-border tunnels, like these tunnels in Gaza, even though they're not cross-border, as a huge threat to them. So again, Hamas, which is digging the tunnels, is threatening both the enemy, which is Israel, but also its own people. So that, again, is another aspect that changes, and I think is very unique to it. But anyway, so in terms of like other aspects of developments of warfare that have led to rethinking, we spoke about submarine warfare. I think this was definitely a kind of a turning point. Is this something that should be lawful? Is this too perfidious? Is it too concealed? Is this okay? I think it was kind of like a revolution in terms of military tactics and military thinking. And I think today we have cyber. No kinetic, no contact, which in a way is like the opposite of tunnels. Right? I mean, it's concealed like tunnels, but it's so much high tech, and it's so. I mean, there's some aspects that are similar, some aspects that are different. But I speak a lot about it in the book. But I think if you're looking for like other major developments on the battlefield, then you have these to kind of like.
Could that also be because of the change of warfare going from state against state to state against non-state actors?
I don't know, because submarines was about state to state, and nuclear weapons. I mean, I didn't include those in my list, but they also state to state. And no, I'm not sure that's a factor.
אני הייתי אפילו לוקח את זה יותר רחוק, ואני הייתי משווה את זה לשימוש של הגרמנים בטנקים, לבליצקריג, זאת אומרת למלחמת הבזק. ואני חושב שמה שהגרמנים עשו בדרך שהם הפעילו את הכוח שלהם, מנהרות מאפשרות, זה לא שזה אומר שזה נעשה, אבל הן מאפשרות לצבא שמנצל את התווך התת-קרקעי, לעשות משהו שהוא באותו סדר גודל של הבליצקריג הגרמני, שבעצם הביס את כל הצבאות והדהים את העולם במשך כמה שנים, וזה היה די נס שהצליחו להתגבר עליו. אבל הרעיון עצמו בהחלט מאפשר את זה. והשאלה אם הצבאות באמת ירימו את הכפפה הזאת ויעשו את זה, מי יעשה את זה ראשון? כי היום תעשיות הנשק לא הולכות לכיוון. ואז הן משאירות את זה בעצם לאותם גורמים שהם פחות ממוסדים, ופחות עשירים, וכאלה שאין להם בעצם את הכישורים לפתח את זה.
כי תעשיות הנשק לא רואות את זה כדאי כלכלית?
תעשיות הנשק, מה שמעניין אותם זה הכסף, שורת הרווח.
בדיוק, זו השאלה.
אז הן לא רואות בזה, איזשהו משהו ששווה לפתח אותו, אבל אני מאמין שזה ישתנה. וברגע שהראשון יעשה את זה, אז כל היתר ילכו אחריו.
ברגע שהראשון יעשה את זה בצורה התקפית, אתה מתכוון.
ברגע שהראשון יעשה את זה, כל היתר יהיו חייבים ללכת אחריו. כי אחרת הם יישארו מרחוק. ופה אפשר לראות גם את ההתפתחות שהייתה של הטנקים, וגם ההתפתחות שהייתה של הצוללות. אותו דבר, אף אחד לא באמת רצה להיכנס לזה, אבל ברגע שהראשון נכנס, כל היתר קנו את זה, וגם אחר כך שאלה איך להשתמש בזה, מה לעשות בזה, איך לפתח את זה. היום אנחנו רואים את זה, כמו אצל האויבים שלנו, רואים את זה אצל חיזבאללה, רואים את זה אצל החמאס, וצריך לזכור שחלק מהטכנולוגיה שמפותחת, נקרא לזה על ידי ציר הרשע, שזה דרום קוריאה, איראן, צפון קוריאה, צפון קוריאה ואיראן, והם כן נמצאים בחבית הזאת, הם כן מפתחים את היכולת הזאת. אם תהיה מלחמה בצפון קוריאה, זאת תהיה... אם תהיה מלחמה בצפון קוריאה, להערכתי תהיה המלחמה התת-קרקעית הראשונה.
It's amazing. I actually gave a talk on tunnels in New York, and there was someone who was working at the South Korean embassy, not embassy, sorry, mission at the UN, and they understand. But what's something that's really mind-blowing about South Korea is that even if they know about these cross-border tunnels, you really wonder why they have not at least destroyed the ones that they know about, right? They left them there, they turned them into tourist attractions, and when you realize the kind of national security risk that it represents, it's quite, but I think now they realize that they might have made mistakes.
100 times more, so 5 and 10 is...
Yeah, maybe that's it. It's like, why not make some money out of the one that we found, and then...
It gives them legitimacy to do other
But
things.
that's an interesting, but I think, yeah, you're right, if there's a war there.
ועוד פעם, אם אנחנו נלחם בלבנון, אז גם לנו תהיה בעיה מאוד קשה בנושא הזה, בטח בעזה, עם ההתמודדות המורכבת של הנושא הזה של המנהרות. ובקשר למה ששאלת קודם, אני חושב שהחמאס לא יוותר על הנכס הזה של השימוש במנהרות, כי הוא מאוד מאוד משרת אותו מבחינת היכולת שלו להגן על עצמו, לגבות מחירים מאוד גבוהים מבחינת כוח שיתקוף אותו, זאת אומרת, הצבא הישראלי, ויחד עם זה גם לגרום להרבה מאוד נפגעים והרבה מאוד הרס בתוך עזה. משהו שלנו יהיה קשה מאוד להסביר, כן? למה יש כל כך הרבה הרוגים, למה יש כל כך הרבה נפגעים, למה ההרס כל כך נרחב. וזה משהו שהעולם לא מבין עדיין, את המשמעויות של המלחמה התת-קרקעית, ופה גם נכנס לנושא החוקי כמובן, שהוא משמעותי, החוק הבינלאומי שבכלל לא נותן מענה לסוגיה הזאת.
I don't know if it's that it doesn't provide an answer. I like to believe that it does provides an answer. In any event, it's not like we have an alternative, right? We don't have another law. We just have international humanitarian law, and we're not going to just decide that it's inapplicable to this subterranean combat. So, but I think one of the major, where I think we would agree definitely is that when you understand the complexity, you realize the challenge, and you want to have a law that is going to be respected, and you want to take a pragmatic view of this. You don't want the law to be thrown out because it's too hard, because it imposes too much on a commander to know things that cannot be known, for example. There's so much about what goes on in the tunnel and what a tunnel is and where it goes and where it begins and where it ends that cannot be known. So you can search for the answer for the longest time, but eventually you just have to say, okay, I just don't know. Like how much do we impose on this commander? And so these are some questions that I think it's more about how you. It may not even be a question of interpretation. It's just about being cognizant of the operational challenges when you either assess how someone else applied the law or when you apply the law yourself.
A brief answer and a question also myself.
Oh, I have so many questions.
About humanitarian law. So it's very interesting what you said about maybe they'll change their mode of tunnels from maybe one long one to a lot of short ones with energy dispersed. And in the intelligence already, the question arises when you see a capability of an enemy, how does that relate to his intention? But you always use the capabilities in order to enlarge his intention or to execute his intention, or there's no connection between intentions, which are made by leadership, and by capabilities, which are more of a professional fashion. I think, for example, it's very important for decision makers and specialists to think what is the future in Gaza, which is maybe one of the underground warfare centers of the globe right now. Where will it lead to when right now we're hearing on one hand, Israel is able to detect to some extent cross-border tunnels. On the other hand, we heard today a tunnel was attacked, which means there are probably additional cross-border tunnels which Israel is probably not aware of. So thinking along your line of thought, we should expect that for the three types of tunnels I mentioned, we'll get probably different mergers of tunnels, more complex tunnels, more use of maybe civilians put inside of tunnels.
Dual-use tunnels.
Maybe using tunnels in opposite directions, either to attract soldiers into them or to attract civilians into them and have them appear somewhere else, like civilians appearing on the Israeli side, very innocent. And for each type of goal, there'll be maybe a new type or a merge type, a hybrid type of an underground structure. And we have to be thinking of these things all the time.
This is why I think, by the way, that I think you're totally right, and I think we have to think about this, and we have to learn about what's going on, for example, in Syria. Syria is no less of an underground warfare theater than Gaza, and I don't know how much Israelis are paying attention to how tunnels are being used in Syria, where all the innovation is taking place, where they're learning from Hamas, and they're improving the ways in which Hamas itself has used tunnels. But in terms of the classification, which is more or less along the lines of the IDF's classification, one of the things I argue in the book is I actually reject this classification, and precisely because of what you said, because in the end, a tunnel is, even though all tunnels are totally different, but a tunnel is a tunnel is a tunnel. Once you've dug that through the soil and through the geological strata and stuff, in the end, you have a tunnel, you have a structure which can be used for a whole range of purposes. So I think if the army continues being a little stuck in thinking it's either a smuggling tunnel or a terror tunnel or whatever it is, then that actually limits the response. It limits the thinking. It's being, it's I think not right. I think it's not accurate. It's not the right way to think about this. You see a tunnel and think, okay, what is the possible range of purposes for which it can be used? So that's something I very strongly believe.
I think our time's up.
We can go on for.
You can leave us here.
It's a very interesting discussion. No, the battery went down already. We had to charge it throughout the session. I think we didn't even start to begin to cover all the issues and questions, and especially when you take the holistic view of tunnels, it's getting even more interesting and more problematic and more complicated and I think you need another book.
I don't think it's going to be about this, but I can leave it to others to criticize and to complete whatever I've left. One of the things that I don't talk about is these deeply buried facilities that you're talking about, which are a major problem for states fighting rogue states.
Second edition, 2019.
Yeah, but a lot of the technology that is used against the non-state actors tunnels is the one that was initially developed by DARPA to find these monsters that are. Anyway.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
So, thank you for the speakers. Thank you for the spectators.
If anybody wants to buy the book,